As an engineer, I've always wanted to solve problems, not just for the sake of solving something, but actually something that's going to matter, that will actually impact clinical care. And so, there was a part of my early journey where I felt like we were developing technology, but it was just sort of for the sake of saying we could do something smaller or with more advanced materials, but not really addressing the type of needs that the patient might have. And so, for me, the way that I think about the translational pipeline is to really talk to clinicians, to talk to scientists, to talk to industry, to understand what are the roadblocks, what are the challenges, what are the unmet questions, and then think about, okay, is there a way we can use our expertise, our engineering approaches to address that?
What if the future of engineering isn't just about building better technology, but about building technology that makes the world better through better healthcare and healthcare delivery? I'm Dr. Resa E. Lewis, and this is the Visible Voices podcast. I'm speaking with Dr. Tejal Desai, the Sorensen Family Dean of Engineering at Brown University. She's a biomedical engineer who's revolutionizing how we deliver life-saving treatments using nanotechnology. And don't worry, audience, we'll talk about nanotechnology. Think microscopic delivery systems that can target diseases at the cellular level. Tejal isn't just advancing the science, she's reimagining how engineering can serve humanity. In this episode, you'll discover how nanotechnology is being used to revolutionize medicine, why Tejal believes the future of engineering must include voices from all backgrounds, and the leadership philosophy that's helped her break barriers while building bridges between engineering and human health. Tejal, welcome to the Visible Voices podcast.
Thanks so much. What a pleasure to be here.
You value diverse teams and working with different backgrounds, different industries, different people. And what stands out to me in terms of what marks your work is it's translational, the bench to bedside journey. And I'm wondering if you can walk the audience through what that looks like. How does one, quote, translate the bench to the bedside?
As an engineer, I've always wanted to solve problems, not just for the sake of solving something, but actually something that's going to matter, that will actually impact clinical care. And so there was a part of my early journey where I felt like we were developing technology, but it was just sort of for the sake of saying we could do something smaller or with more advanced materials, but not really addressing the type of needs that the patient might have. And so for me, the way that I think about the translational pipeline is to really talk to clinicians, to talk to scientists, to talk to industry, to understand what are the roadblocks, what are the challenges, what are the unmet questions, and then think about, okay, is there a way we can use our expertise, our engineering approaches to address that? And so I tell all of my students, don't just do something because that's the way we always did it. Make sure there's a reason why we're doing it. And that sometimes is not the most complex system, right? We often in science are trying to create these very complex, nuanced approaches, something that can be published in a high impact paper. But sometimes a very simple approach that can make a difference. And so we have to balance that.
Yeah, I think I love design. I love human-centered design. And I really believe that's the way to create change in healthcare. Have the end user at the table, or have the clinician at the table, or have the person utilizing the device at the table. You in particular have done work in diabetes, in absorption of drugs and targeting through the gut, retinal diseases in the eyes. Before we get into some of those specifics, I'm wondering, was there a personal impetus at all, like any family member or any of your own experience medically, healthcare-wise, that you're like, I really want to look at this disease or this organ?
I mean, there's certainly a host of different diseases that have impacted my family. I would say diabetes is one of those that really was an early motivator. South Asians are a population that has a high propensity for both cardiovascular as well as diabetes in terms of disease. And so it was something that I observed constantly through growing up, realizing that there really, both from a fundamental understanding of the disease as well as options to treat and be able to impact that area, certainly was important to me.
Yeah. The personal often becomes a professional for many of us. And I did wonder, as I was doing my journey into reading about you, listening to different presentations you've given, and just really celebrating your professional journey and that you're now Dean of Engineering at Brown. Did you ever consider going to med school to kind of marry your interests?
Oh, I definitely considered it. In high school, I was one of those people who worked in the back office and, filed patient records. I actually shadowed an orthopedic surgeon and did a host of things. And then I realized actually what I became fascinated by is how do you take technology and really apply it to the patient? So that was an interest that came about actually by being present in environments where clinicians were working.
Did you always know you had this in you, or is it something over time you're like, I think I have a knack for this?
Definitely the latter. So I think I will say I was always a student who was interested in a lot of things. So and that wasn't just science. I could see myself doing English. I was very active in political science and worked at the state capitol. And so I think it was that insatiable appetite to do a lot of things that really cemented my interest in biomedical engineering, because it wasn't that here you're done, this thing and that's the end of it. It was constantly learning, constantly integrating fields. And, I think that's what kept me in it for, 30 plus years later.
So let's get into some of the science. You mentioned 5% of drugs successfully make it through the GI tract. But yet, what if there was a technology or a way to actually increase absorption and targeting, and not so that a big dollop of medication gets dropped, but there's a way of timing. So not only can you identify where the medication goes, but also the time release nature of it.
Yeah, so we have had a long-standing interest in how do you interface with biological barriers? And so when you think about the gut, that's a huge barrier within the body. It has a lot of real estate, and yet very little crosses for good reason, right? We want to usually keep things out of our body. And the same is true for the skin or for the surface of the eye. We usually want to keep things out unless they're absolutely necessary. From a drug standpoint, it would be, of course, preferable if we could get the drugs we want to get across that barrier. But what I realized is that we knew very little about why things were crossing and why they weren't. And so the first step for us was sort of understanding how does that barrier respond to different types of formulations or particles. We sort of just assume you take something and some fraction get into the body, but it's actually quite complex. And those cells, they open and close, they let things in and out based on different types of receptors and different sort of mechanical signaling. And so we took that knowledge and then we said, well, can we now, understanding what goes in and out, develop systems that can actually preferentially get things to cross?
Yeah. The specific example of the eye, when you were running your section in San Francisco, worked with ophthalmologists to help address retinal disease.
So actually, shortly after I came to UCSF, I happened to be presenting in a symposium where I was presenting some of our drug delivery technologies actually in what we were doing in the gut and what we were doing in other areas of the body. And it just so happened that an ophthalmologist presented right after me about how they had all these advanced drugs to treat retinal disease, but the way that they were administering it into the eye was through essentially a syringe. And so as a patient, I said, what are we doing? We have these very advanced biologics and we're taking a syringe or a needle and basically poking it into an eye every single month. And so that with some of that serendipitous interaction after his talk, I said, hey, we're doing some things over here. What if we actually combined forces and we actually thought about this as a design problem? How could we design something that would allow for these advanced drugs to get to where they need to go, but would not be so invasive? And I think that's the beauty of collaboration. And I still remember we sketched on a napkin, hey, what about a device that did this? And we have that napkin still. How could we really change what is the most important part, what the patient experiences and how they could actually get better care?
The beauty of this example in particular is it's human-centered, it's patient-centered. Everybody cringed because you're like, who wants to get a needle in the eye? Even if it's life-saving, organ-saving, sight-saving medicine, no one thinks that a needle in the eye could possibly be painless. It's not.
Right. Right.
Fun for anybody to experience. So can you talk a little bit more about what you were able to develop to help address that issue?
Yeah, so we were able to develop a very small miniaturized implant that instead of having a patient administer drug every single month, you would have one injection using that same needle of a very small device that would sit in the back of the eye and deliver the protein, the therapeutic, for not just days or weeks, but actually months. And the important thing about that is that we could tune the actual release rate very, very precisely so that if you're a patient, typically when you get an injection, they're giving you a lot of drug because most of it actually doesn't go to where it needs to go. And so by really precisely controlling where we put the device and how that drug is released, we could get away with less drug, so that's less side effects, but also more cost effective. And so, right, the current therapy is very, very expensive. And so if we can shrink the amount of drug, do it once versus 6 times over a 6-month period, there's a huge amount of sort of benefit economically, but also for the patient, because every time they come in, they're taking a day off from work, they have to have a caregiver come in, and then there's, of course, the other side effects.
Yeah, human centered, cost savings, and just, yeah, the resources saved. I found myself when reading about the gut, the eye. Have you ever experienced some of these devices or tried things out to see how they feel, see what it would be like to ingest, etc.?
I have not myself, but we have definitely, we do extensive studies to make sure that all of the materials are biocompatible. We've gone through lots of, immunological screening, and typically we're always using materials that we know have had a long history in terms of being used in the body safely.
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable because I think the audience members and I just didn't realize how far along we are with the science of being able to literally place medications where we need them, time release them so it's given over time and you don't deliver a toxic dose, but then also the delivery mechanism is biodegradable and not harmful to the body.
Absolutely.
So I'd
Because you
love to.
don't want to leave a trace, things sitting there for years within the body. So what we've really thought about is do your action and then disappear without causing long-term incompatibilities with the body.
Yeah. So let's move into your thing, your technology, nanotechnology, nanorods, and nanoribbons. I really love this.
Well, let me first maybe just talk about why nanotechnology in the first place when it comes to human health. And I think you alluded to this in your intro that if we can create things at a very small size scale, the nanoscale, we're at the scale that is smaller than a living cell. And so we can have those types of materials specifically interact with cells in the body to deliver a cargo or to bind a receptor on a cell or to signal that cell to do X versus Y. And you can't do that with something that's even at the micro or macro scale. And so we're at the size scale of proteins, and that's how proteins work, right? They're sort of signaling, they're telling the body to do certain things, or cytokines, or other types of biological molecules. But now we're actually creating synthetic materials that can do the same thing.
As I said, some of these cool terms, nanotechnology, nanorods, nanoribbons, where do they play a role? Yeah.
So one of the projects that we're working on involves what we call nanorods. And the reason we're using these is that we can modify these rods to actually present specific antibodies. So imagine a thin rod that has these biological entities sort of affixed to that rod, but it's a very small scale. And so why we like this small scale, we can inject it into, let's say, this space, the subdermal space, so right below the skin. And in one of the projects, what we're doing is that we're actually creating antibodies that bind specific immune molecules within that space. And by doing that, we can shift the balance of the immune system. So a particular example that we recently worked on was in the area of psoriasis, where when people have that disease, they basically have the body attacking their own cells. And so you have this autoimmune reaction. And that's because the body has an enrichment of one type of immune cell versus the other. And so by injecting these nanorods that then present an antibody, what that antibody does is it basically soaks up some of the biological materials that are telling the body to attack itself. And we're actually sending signals to the body to sort of stop, to calm down, to go into what we call a regulatory state as opposed to an activated state. And what we've shown is that these nanorods can actually abate the body's attack. And we've shown in psoriasis models, we're now working in other autoimmune diseases that we can really shift the balance. But the key is that these rods and the scale that they're at allow them to communicate with cells, allow them to really present the biological entity in a way that's recognized by the body.
And as a reminder, this is nanotechnology, and I loved even reading. It was bringing me back to my histology days with electron microscopy. Like, I love it. And the patterns of the rods and the ribbons are just beautiful visually, even though that's not the sole impetus, but it doesn't hurt. It's kind of fun to see such beauty in terms of engineering design changing disease. And you anticipated my question. I was going to ask about where you were with immunotherapies, and this is just a perfect example. So to be clear, you're a dean of a school of engineering. So the amount of time you're spending doing research has changed. It's shifted. You are overseeing teams. You are leading and administrating. These days, how do you make a decision about what you say yes to versus what you say, you know what, I think we'll pass for now?
Yeah, well, one of the things I'll say just first off is that I made a very conscious decision that even though I wanted to become dean and really be able to impact a broader community than just sort of my research area, it was really important for me to keep active in the research because both from a standpoint of understanding what researchers and professors have to be doing and what are the constraints and barriers to doing work, but also it allows me to think about, to make sure that I'm current and understand how fields are evolving, how we can do things better. And so I try to make time for that, but I also recognize, as you said, that we can't do everything. And so for me, it is about asking the question of, is this going to be important for the students or the faculty or the community that I support? Is this going to move the needle in some way? Is this going to actually help us achieve our goals? And I always think about what are our North Stars? What are important to at least the School of Engineering at Brown right now, but whatever environment I'm trying to lead.
Love it. I'd love to take this opportunity to talk more about the school on which you've been building, that you've reinforced, given a huge facelift. And I recently took a tour and was delighted to see the design workshop. For audience members that are wondering what they would see if they were to take a walk through and visit the Brown School of Engineering design workshop, what's there?
I mean, it's one of my favorite spaces in the school because it is just a wonderful, like, buzzing environment, vibrant of students who are making. And what do I mean by making? We have everything from 3D printers to wood shops to metal fabrication tools and laser cutters. But importantly, we have space to just create everything from our car team that's building a race car to those actually involved in furniture design and really thinking about accessible strategies to be able to build and design in new ways. And so when I walk in there, I actually see the power of engineering, design, and innovation coming together. And the other important thing is that it's a place where there's no barriers. So you can never have done anything and we will teach you how to do it. You don't have to be an engineer. You don't have to have had that prior experience. We want anybody to use that space.
There's a train the trainer model such that once a student, an undergraduate, learns about the 3D printer and 3D printing, you can sign up for a workshop with that student. That student becomes the trainer for other students.
And so there's a very much of a peer mentorship model within that space. You know, I think one of the things we realized early on is that certainly students were counting themselves out of technical fields like engineering because they felt like they had to have done something like that in high school. You know, they had to come from a family where there was engineering, or they had to be exposed to these very technical domains. And we wanted to show them actually, right, come in, try something. It's very low stakes, right? It's not a class. It's
Right.
just a living lab. And then you can see whether you like it, as opposed to jumping into a class and thinking, "Ugh, what am I doing?"
Yeah, so beautiful. Tejal, when did you realize that you had a voice and when did you start using your voice?
I have to say, I actually realized this when I was an undergrad at Brown. I'm not just saying that because I'm a dean at Brown now, but I realized because I was an engineer, but I was actually quite involved in thinking about how to enhance the broader community for students, particularly from underrepresented backgrounds, to bring more faculty from diverse backgrounds, to have more opportunities, to have a more diverse and inclusive community. I realized there were opportunities for students to have a voice in shaping the communities that they're in. And I learned that at Brown because I was given the opportunity to be able to share my thoughts with the administration, to be able to think about what are concrete ways that we can act as partners in developing the community that we want in the future.
Did that manifest in a certain class or a certain university council or extracurricular?
I mean, I got involved first in student government, and so I was freshman rep for the undergraduate class, but then I also became very involved in what we call sort of the Brown Students of Color now. I was a minority peer counselor. I sat on what was then known as the Third World Council, where we met regularly with the president and the provost, really thinking about how to make Brown a more inclusive space. I worked on everything from need blind financial aid to admissions. And I did that as a student. So I realized that actually you didn't need to have the title. You just needed to really think about, right, sort of have the interest and the passion and really work collaboratively to make change within an institution.
When I took this recent tour of the School of Engineering and looked at the different lab spaces, your scientists, some of your faculty, some of your students and postdocs spoke about the role that AI is playing.
I mean, without a doubt, AI is changing the way we do research. It's changing our educational models. I like to think that, and although we've been talking a lot about AI, I mean, AI has been embedded in many of our faculty's work for many, many years. We are just advancing it at a much more rapid scale than we were previously. And so I really think that doesn't matter what field you're doing, having exposure to AI, understanding how you can use those tools is critical going forward. We've recently really brought in some new faculty that they think about not just how do we deploy AI, but how do we, from the ground level, build in devices that incorporate AI that can be used for healthcare, used for robotics, can be used for autonomous devices and vehicles. And so from that standpoint, I think from an engineering school, it's not just about the AI algorithm, it's how do we actually interface that with useful technologies, because they have to be able to communicate with each other.
Feel free if you can go a little deeper on one of those examples.
So, I mean, one of our faculties is really thinking about in the area of autonomous vehicles and underwater application. Their team is designing actually sort of underwater submersibles that are incorporating AI to be able to sense the coastal regions of Rhode Island. We've always been able to sort of create sensors that can detect data, but now we're incorporating algorithms that can take that data, process them, send out data, and actually refine the type of data that we're seeking as it goes. And so it's this really interesting application where we're controlling where the robot is deployed, but then the robots are actually telling us, okay, actually we can go here or here based on the information they connect and actually tell us where to go as opposed to we're telling them. So it's this sort of back and forth that I think is going to change the way we understand our environment.
What is one thing you're looking forward to or you're developing now that you'd love to share with the audience regarding engineering, the School of Engineering, and even your own research work?
So in the School of Engineering, really building on our really amazing makerspace, we are trying to reimagine and actually have a new project in an institute that we're trying to form called Ideate, which is the Institute for Design, Engineering, and translational enterprises. So we're really trying to bring that all together to change the new model of incorporating design into the types of engineering that we do. At a more personal or research level, I'm really excited about some of the work that we're doing in thinking about new ways to harness the immune system. I mentioned one application, but we're really about to publish a new set of work where we have the ability to have sort of what we call multimodal signaling. So designing materials that can do multiple things at the same time, be able to differentially signal to not just one type of cell, but multiple cells. And we think we have really interesting applications in the cancer space and in the autoimmune space. And then I think as a leader, where I am excited, of course, it's a challenging time in higher education, but I think what I want to make sure we do is continue to innovate, continue to support our faculty, and not just let this time be a time of stasis, but be a time of maybe reimagining how we do things. And you talked about bringing new people together. Well, this is the time to do it. Right? This is the time where we want to bring non-traditional collaborations, bring different people into our environment, because we have to continue the work that we're doing, and we have to think about new models.
The Visible Voices podcast amplifies voices in the healthcare, equity, and current trend spaces. Our team includes Dr. Giuliano DePortu and me, Dr. Resa E. Lewis. Find me at Resa E. Lewis, MD on social media, or visit the website, thevisiblevoicespodcast.com. Please give us a 5-star rating on Apple or wherever you listen to podcasts. Be sure to subscribe, watch, and listen on YouTube, and share the show with a friend, because together we're making healthcare more equitable, one visible voice at a time. This podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. The views and opinions expressed by our hosts and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of their institutions. Information shared here should never substitute for clinical judgment or for medical advice.